Good afternoon, everyone. I trust that you are hearing me clearly.
Yes, we can hear you, Dr. Immanuel.
Excellent. Okay, we'll okay. Well, good afternoon. Welcome everyone to the first series of the Future Government's Programs Insights webinar. It gives me great pleasure to kickstart the first session. We will be today we'll be talking about the nexus of crisis management and public policy. This will be our first session, and we'll talk about the other session shortly. In the meantime, what I would do is we can just hold on just for a couple of seconds. I see a lot of people are logging in at the moment. So if maybe just for a couple of seconds, 20 or so seconds, just so that we can then have a start. In the meantime, if you would like to, maybe perhaps if you are listening in from outside of the UAE, perhaps you can state where you're from, where you're tuning in from. In the meantime, before we start, we also have a welcome poll, as you can see here on the screen. Feel free to go to the website www.menti.com in the meantime, with the code listed here on your screen, so that you can also participate in this poll that we will present at the end of the session. Okay, so without further ado, I want to officially welcome each and every one of you to today's first session on the nexus of crisis management and public policy. Now, I'm Immanuel Azaad Moonesar, Associate Professor at the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government. I have been working with the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government for just over 8 years and a half now. And it's been quite a journey to see the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government grow over the last 16 years or so. Now, we at the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government has been launching these free workshops for the public at large, where we will be talking about our different programs, as well as presenting one of the topic related to that specific program. So to kickstart it for me today, I will be looking at crisis management in these times that we live in at the moment, and the importance of public policy, and show that the two marry each other or connect into each other. Now, the public policy domain itself, it falls within one of our future government programs, the Masters of Public Policy, which I will give you a lot more details later on in this session. Now, in this program, we have our specialism in health, in education, in social policy, as well as science and technology, in addition to sustainable development. And also students have that opportunity to do a general degree in public policy as well. Now, in the next couple of days, tomorrow, we will also will be hearing from our Professor Meladina on innovating for the future of public value, as well, followed by Dr. Raquel, who will also take us through the importance of sustaining change management within the context of the public sector. And then followed by Dr. Yusuf, who will also give us a bit insights into public administration and its public affairs associated. Now, the first three webinars we'll be delivering it in English language, and the last webinar will be delivered in Arabic. Now, for all intents and purposes, each of these webinars are tailored towards our specific programs. So for me today, I will be focusing on public policy, and then the others will be focusing on their public policy, public administration, a master's in public administration, followed by a master's in innovation management, as well as an executive master's in public administration, which is taught in Arabic at the moment. Now, just a little bit about myself. So I've been working with the school for the last 8 years. I come from originally from Trinidad and Tobago. Been working in academia for over 15 years, residing in the UAE just over 12 years, and currently also the president of the Academy of International Business for the Middle East North Africa region. Just a bit of a summary. Now, a couple of you would have seen the welcome poll. So if you want to just take a couple of seconds to go to the website, you can feel free. We will be posting this throughout um, throughout today's session. Now we have quite a tight session in terms of we will try to keep this under 60 minutes. Now, the order per session for today's workshop is basically, I'll talk to you all briefly about crisis management, the connection between crisis management and public policy, and we'll have a bit of a discussion about this. And then we will talk about our programs as well as any sort of questions that you may also have with regards to the topic as well as our programs. Now, I also alternatively from time to time, I'll be looking at the chat. So if you do have any questions, please do not hesitate to pop them into the chat box within Zoom, as well as in addition, if you do have any particular questions which relates to admissions, our team is also on the chat box. We have Nawal, who is our admissions and programs manager, programs relations manager at the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government, as well as our registrar, Kieran Ross, and many others from the Mohammed bin Rashid who will be answering your questions with regards to admissions and so on. Now, I'm seeing a couple of questions for the code. So the code for the Menti, for the first question on what is public policy, I'm just typing it here for you all, so at least you can be able to maybe copy and paste it perhaps. So in the meantime, you can participate into that poll. Now, basically, what are we going to do today? Briefly, we will try to understand that link between crisis management and public policy. We will also cover what is crisis management, what do we mean by public policy, as well as briefly discuss the different steps involved in public policy in addition to crisis management. And then in terms of these two terminologies, how we inform our future priority setting processes in our policy-making process in itself. So for those who are joining us, we do have our welcome poll, so feel free to participate in it. From time to time, this will be, the codes will be there. I have also posted the code in the chat box. Now, what is public policy? When we talk about public policy, there are a couple of questions that comes to mind. We have the who, in terms of what is this particular story most likely about? Or in other words, what is the public policy issue in itself? What is happening? When is this happening? Where, why, and how? Now, for many of us, and we know this is one of those dilemmas we have faced in our daily lives over the last just over a year now, is the pandemic that we are currently living in, the COVID pandemic era. Now, these are the 6 main questions that we would ask ourselves. Who is this story? Who is the COVID mostly affecting? What is this whole COVID about, for instance? And now today's talk, I would give a couple of examples from COVID, but we also have many other examples as well. Also, when did it take place, where, why, and how? So these are some of those questions, and we will unpack these questions as we proceed. Now, one of our questions that we tend to ask our students generally is, what is public policy? And many students, and I'm sure that you have participated in the poll. I can see the answers are going up here. Um, so what is public policy in itself? Some may call it as a social contract. Now, what is this social contract? Some may even refer it to as it's what the government ought to do or ought not to do, and some as well as what it does and what it doesn't do. This is one Christopher Simmons once said. Then, if we go back a bit in time, at least what 7 decades ago, Laswell, who is one of those pioneers of public policy cycle, he stated public policy means who gets what, when, and how, just to simply put it. As well as here in the UAE, from the government of Dubai, public policy is described as the translation of the government priorities and principles, all in a coordinated series of actions in order to deliver that specific desired change as a country. Now, public policy in itself, and we will see how the mix of various activities as well as the different phases that are involved in the public policy means in order to achieve the strategic objectives or aims from a country's point of view. So those are just some of the basic principles, so to speak, or the a brief summary of what we mean by public policy for the context of today's webinar. Now you see a little the two red words there. It says social contract. Similarly, if you are married, you have a marriage contract between for students coming into a school. They would have a student code contract, so to speak. For you signing up to do a master's degree, you also would have some sort of contract with respect to what you put in is what you get out at the end of the full course of studies. So to simply put it, public policy is similarly as a social contract as well. Now, there are a number of various activities that may occur from time to time that really triggers the need for public policy. Now, for the purposes of today, we will briefly talk about these in terms of those three main questions. If you remember, there were six questions before: the what, the who, and the when. So this need for policy comes from public concerns, strategic directions, priorities, leadership priorities, as well as a country federal requirements, also media attention, if there's any international events, external events, emergencies, crises, as well as any sort of pressures when it comes to finance, budget, economic pressures, as well as natural resource pressures as well. So these are your what, your who, and your when in terms of your need for policy, for public policies in itself. Now, we may also ask ourselves, what makes good policy? What are the features of good policies when it comes in times of crisis? Now, one of those key features that we should focus on is the need for having forward-looking government foresight from the various ministries. Now, we can see in the UAE, in the government of the UAE itself, there are many ministries where even the strategies have been put into place. We have been, in the last 6 years or so, we have been working towards the National Agenda 2021. Now we are working towards 2030 agenda and even 2050 and 2071 agendas, various agendas across the board. Now, it's really important for governments to really have that foresight and that planning for the future in terms of managing in terms of crisis. Now, another some sort of foresight as well is having that approach of thinking outside of the box. And I commonly call this box the black box. So sometimes we really need to think outside of the box when it comes to public policies and managing in times of crisis. In addition, it is very important for us to engage with those main stakeholders as much as possible so as to have integrated approaches as well as having those programs and initiatives as well. Now, and fourthly, as we've seen a couple of years ago, I believe it was in 2015 or 14, there was the Year of Innovation here in the UAE, where Iptica and APTA, in terms of creativity and innovation, which was quite a focus in the government, we need to continue that to have this creativity and innovation in place. And then four additional features that really add to good policies and good features of public policies. Another being the articulation as well as the utilization of evidence-based policies. And we will talk briefly about what we mean by this in order to inform the decision-making process. Now, as well as in addition, being able to have measurable impacts. Now, what do we mean by measurable impacts? Those three words that we all work towards when we do our performance appraisals. The key performance API, the key performance indicators, the KPIs, so to speak. Now, it is very important for us to have these impacts in order to ensure that it's engaged with the public in order to make those behavioral changes and commitments as a public as well. Now, and the last 2 points in terms of public policies need to be efficient and very cost effective, as well as at the end to ensure that we have that facility to monitor, evaluate, and formally review all of those policies, systems, and processes that we have in place. It's very critical for us, and we will see a lot of this in a couple of minutes. Now, public policies do involve the government, by no doubt. By and large, public policies need the government intervention. Now, there are various levels when we talk about government interventions. Now, this can vary from having low levels of intervention from the government versus large-scale interventions from the government. Now, these range all the way from laws all the way to leading, influencing, informing, as well as stewardship. Now, many governments over the last decade or so have been moving from large-scale intervention more so to a low-scale intervention, so as to allow for the public to make changes based on behavioral, to make based on their own behaviors and so on. Now, what do we mean by this in terms of the government interventions? Now, we don't have the time to go through the matrix itself. However, just for the purposes of today, one of the important, when we talk about crisis and public policies, one of the key areas is really to understand what's happening on the ground and set an agenda in addressing the current crisis. At the end of the day, we want to ensure that we build the awareness and the confidence in the public, provide those new opportunities, as well as ensuring that this is led through the stewardship and leadership as a whole. Now, one example here in the UAE is one of the main examples here, as most of us would see, is most of us would have seen is the camera system that we have when we drive. Now, Dubai Police early last year early in 2020 put out this decree here where we could see setting traffic fines in the UAE, where if a citizen have abide by the rules, they can get a 25% discount on if they have acquired fees previously, as well as if there were no fees incurred within over 6 months, 50% and all the way as well. Now, this in itself is just one of those many examples where we talk about behavioral insights approach, where the government have a low level of intervention in a positive way so as to bring about positive social change, so as to bring about the positive impacts as a community where we as citizens, as the public, we take ownership of making that change in itself. So another would be like the bills, the water rate bills that we may get from DEWA or FEWA and others, where the color of the bill, you can see if it's green, it means that you have been contributing significantly to the environment, lowering having lower usage of water and electricity consumption, and so on. If you're in the yellow, orange, red zone, it's some questions for yourself to say, okay, look, I need to reduce. So these are some of those ways where behavioral insights come about, where this is really important from a government standpoint and in managing in times of crisis. Now, when we talk about public policy cycle, what do we mean by this? Now, in the public policy cycle, there's no one-stop rule when we talk about public policy in itself, the public policy process. Now, some persons have 12 stages, some has 8, some has 9. Here in the UAE, we have seven main stages. Now, this public policy cycle, this will take us 12 weeks usually to go into details, as week by week, to go into details as to this entire public policy cycle. Of course, we just have a couple of minutes. So I'll briefly talk about it. Basically, it's 7 steps. The first is that policy setting agenda. We really need to justify the reasoning for that particular policy. We need to work out the type of framework and the setup that we would have. In addition, we spoke about this, I mentioned this earlier, where we say the importance of using evidence to inform your policy. Now, think about any type of policy that you want to put into play. You want it to be enforced, or you want to develop this particular policy. Think about it as a court case as well. So you have, if you more or less need to provide the evidence in order to defend or to charge that person of a particular crime, and depending on the evidence, this would warrant the decision. Similarly, when we talk about public policies in itself, it's a very similar approach. We need evidence to support the rationale for that particular policy, for the implementation of the policy, for the various elements that you involve in the policy, and so on. Now, it is also very critical for us to understand in terms of the various steps. And I'm seeing a couple of questions as to why it would be different, like in the US, for instance. Now, in the US system, in not only in the US, but every country have their own style of developing their policies. Now, it is very critical for us to keep in mind, once you have, so for instance, originally the UAE had 5 steps. The 5 steps in itself, a bit of a different in the changes of the titles, as we would see here. Originally, it was called policy agenda. The next was called identification or evaluation of policies, and so on. So the key is to ensure that the various features within public policies are adhered to, generally speaking. Now, and sometimes the policy justification phase, as well as the framework setup, may be split into 2. For instance, this is how it's as in the US, and not across the board in the US. Some of the states in the US may have it broken into 2 parts, and this may be an 8-step model. As well as in Australia, the number of stages may also be varied. However, the main premise of public policy elements it should be put into place there. Now, thirdly, we talk about behavioral insights, change, and so on. Where on Tuesday, Dr. Raquel will talk about change management in itself, and I'm certain there will be some discussions about how policy is so critical when we talk about change management and ensuring that we we engage with the public in order to create that change, that positive social change in itself. Now, evidence, once you have established those evidence, this in itself also helps you to come up with your plan A, plan B, plan C, or in other words, identifying your various policy options, and then also coming up with some sort of rating sort of style to say, okay, this is one of this is the rollout of this particular policy. These are our various options. However, this is how we would rank it. Again, this will be based on your evidence from research for itself. Then your fifth stage focuses on designing policy solutions, implementation as well, making sure the rollout of that particular policy, and then to find out whether or not the policy is working, monitor, evaluate it, review it. Now, the seventh step, as you can see here, in itself, it's not a last stage step in itself. At each and every one of these phases that you see here, or stages as we may call them, stakeholder engagement is very critical. Now, when you're doing your first setup, your stakeholders may vary from your second stakeholders in itself. Now, within the second, for instance, your first, when you're doing a policy justification, this may come from high priorities from the government level, federal, at emirate or state level, and government departments in itself. Now, if we talk about stage two, this may also involve your government, a particular government entity, but this is where like institutions, academic institutions, researchers, policy institutes may also be part and parcel engaging here. And at each and every one of these stages, you will have varying stakeholders. So it is very critical for us to keep in mind that we engage with each and every one of these various stages and engaging with the stakeholders themselves. Now, stakeholders can vary from government, from private sector. It goes to academics, to researchers, to non-government agencies, and many others as well. Now, at the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government, recently, within our journal, the Dubai Policy Review, it identified three basic components of public policy in itself. Now, we have identified, it's important for us to identify the issue, or in other words, the problem that is being perceived wrong in the society in itself, then coming up with some sort of policy so that it supports the government's decision, as well as the process by which it helps us to solve when it comes to the politics as well as the governmental frameworks in itself. So these are three critical points that is needed when we talk about the public policy process as well. So these, in other words, features. Now, evidence-based, when we talk about in terms of the evidence base, we mean research. We need to inform our policy decisions with research and publications in itself. It goes hand in hand. It is very critical for us to appraise these various policy options when we do put policies in place. Let's take which is a common interest to everyone. In the case of the COVID-19, we saw evidence informed policymaking can strengthen health systems in itself. We saw the drive towards the process, as well as to ensure that that health for all is provided, at least. For instance, the rollout of the vaccines and so on. Now, some may say in terms of the rollout of the vaccines, it was too quick. one of the important things that we need to remember, we are no longer living in the 20th century. We're living in the 21st century, where information is by the click of our fingers. It's literally in our hands, in the palms of our hands. Now we have so much access, not only to technology, but also budgets to having infrastructures in place, as well as many committees has been set up over the last century in order to work towards planning, to work towards in managing such a crisis. So it's really critical for us to keep this in mind. And millions of persons have really contributed towards sustaining the number of deaths as itself and keeping the deaths as minimal as possible as compared to 100 years ago when we look at the Spanish flu, for instance. So it's a totally different era. Now we have access to a lot of evidences now. The way we used to do research 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago is very different in terms of the data gathering. Everything is electronic. So it's really important for us to ensure that our policies are supported by research. Now, and then you may ask, where can we get these particular policies, supporting documents or resources, so to speak? Now, this comes in many forms and fashions in itself. Now, as the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government, we have four main pillars at the school. We have our research, we have our academic, we have our executive education, as well as our advisory and consultancy. Now, 16 years ago, Sheikh Mohammed, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed, has decreed to the School of Government to be a policy institute to ensure that good governance, as well as fostering good public policy and values across the citizens for the UAE, as well as the Arab world and internationally. So we as a School of Government, we are a think tank, a policy think tank, and one of our research and publications outputs really comes through our books, our policy briefs, reports, as well as our policy review journal, in addition to our public policy forums as a School of Government that we've been doing, as well as our international case study books that we've been publishing with Emerald Publishing in the UK, and we have many others that that are in the process at the moment. Now, our public policy main field, basically in social policy, as well as education, health policy. We have public leadership, future governments and innovation, as well as sustainable development in itself. So these are our main tracks at the School of Government when it comes to research. Now, all of these, as you may see here, are aligned with the public policy degree program, where each of our we have specialization for each of these areas. Now, public policy resources, those are some of the examples of public policy resources. Now, you can also draw on evidence coming from events. So from our international conferences, from regional conferences, and even local conferences. Not only the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government do these, but in collaboration with many other government entities as a whole. Now, these are also forms of evidences that you can also draw on informing your public policies in itself. Now, why is this evidence from public policy so important? It's, as we've seen, it is critical in order to mitigate those deaths that we've been having, the spread of the coronavirus as an example, so as we can deliver effective health services and ensure that our government services are up and running, as well as being able to forecast in how to finance and how to organize them in the near future as well. Now, so this is one of the elements of today's public policy discussion. Now, we also have as we know, crisis is one of those areas where we need to narrowing in on. Now, just as a point in to state, we do have, if you go in our website under executive education, we do have a module on imagining the role of governments in times of crisis, which is free to the public, but you need to register in order. It takes about 4 to 5 hours to get done. Now, what do we mean by crisis? In other words, crisis, as we know, we've been through a crisis in the last couple of months, where the crisis definition, by and large, goes by a series of events or developments that has been widely perceived by members of the public or stakeholders, as well as coming up and say, as well as seeing it as being an urgent and serious threat to us as in our various ways of life, in our various social structures, and so on. Now, there are challenges when we talk about crisis. Now, crisis has become very politicized, as we can see, as rather than reacting quickly. It's threatening the security and the legitimacy of the political system in itself. So this is where crisis management is really critical to be hand in hand in the public policy domain. Now, as we've seen, black swans is one of those typical examples of the crisis. We know we have COVID, which has contributed significantly worldwide. Now, in response, there are 3 types of crisis responses. Now we have our reactive, you have our proactive, as well you have your do nothing. What do we mean by reactive responses? Reactive responses really focuses on those actions that take place where there are no alternative but to act after doing nothing. Reactive responses do more damage. It also hurt trust, as well as it tends to foster less organizational learning than proactive responses. Now, when we talk about do nothing, the difference between inaction due to inability, inaction to assess the situation for the decision-making process in itself. So this in itself is one of those phases where we talk about crisis management. Is one of those when we try to mitigate the crisis. Now, there are a couple of types of policy in action. Now, we have calculated inaction, we have ideology inaction, as well as imposed inaction, reluctant inaction, as well as inadvertent inaction. Now, we can see, I'm looking at the time here and I'm seeing that we're running close to our time here. So we will circulate these slides, but for the purposes of for the purposes of today, I'll just focus on this particular one here where we talk about crisis management phases. Now, what do we mean when we talk about these 6 phases as a community? When we talk about these phases, we really look at prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. Now, what do we mean by the prevention aspect? To simply put it, the prevention, as we know, is to ensure that we take those actions in order to decrease the likelihood of that event overtaking. For instance, the number of deaths, the mortality rate when it came to the COVID crisis in itself. So ensuring that techniques and initiatives were put into place to mitigate those deaths, hence the lockdown, hence many other varying initiatives, wearing of masks, gloves, and so on, regular testing. Now, mitigation is another phase where it's those efforts where we really try to reduce the impact of that actual disaster that is taking place. Now, this is to ensure that the governments, stakeholders, as well as the community really try to ensure that that resilience is being maintained and the resources as well. Now, a couple of weeks ago, there was a talk from the Ministry of Health and Prevention. I can't remember the title of it. It was a Health Economic Society that was launched here in the UAE. Now, this Health Economic Forum, so to speak, there was one of the officials. He said, "Should we let COVID kill the economy, or we kill COVID in order to sustain the economy of the country?" So this is one of those ways in ensuring that that resiliency is being maintained within the community in itself. Now, preparedness is one of those main areas in terms of the development of those plans and responding and recovering and so on. So these are our five main phases that we really need to focus in on. Now, today we know that the government functions are being faced with a number of crises. What do we need to do in terms of responding to these crises is working hand in hand with the government and building and ensuring that the public policies are being made in the most effective and efficient way possible. Now, we have attached a couple of extra reading materials if you're interested. Now, once we have defined what is public policy, the various phases, as well as crisis management and the various phases. Now, it's really important for us to marry these two and to ensure that that connection really is held tight. It's important for us to focus on the parity that is at hand in order to address stakeholders' concerns, to address public concerns, as well as to mitigate against any disasters that is and to lower that mitigation of those disasters that's occurring. Now, this is a whole week of intense training that just to do priority setting in itself. So just to summarize, we really need to ensure that the livelihood is we want to bring about positive social change in order to inform that policy making process. We want to ensure that the impact is positive, as well as to ensure that the funding schemes, and it helps to strengthen the requirements when it comes to those scarce resources and the allocation of those scarce resources. So it's really important for us to really have priority setting as one of our main goals. Now, just as a recap, this is our public policy cycle in general. From countries, it varies. So it's very important for us to keep this in mind. Now, as I know some of you have seen the numbers have gone over 100 here. Let's see, just to see the results. Now, what is public policies? Those top three words that comes to mind when we talk about public policies. Now, let's see. So government comes to mind mainly: rules, regulations, guidelines, law, governance, principles. Those are the main keywords that comes to mind as a public. And thank you all for participating in this poll. Now, in public policy, in summary, before we move into talking about our programs in much more details, it's important for us to keep that connection between crisis management and public policies. It's really critical for us to do this. And one way of ensuring that we have that main connection is through public policy institutions such as the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government. Now, we do know that, and I mentioned this earlier, you would have seen our announcements that this week, which is it is an initiative from the School of Government in itself, we'll be running this series of workshops from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. for the next couple of days. So today, I have done a summary of crisis management and public policy, as well as, and I will talk briefly shortly on the program. And then tomorrow, we'll be talking about innovation for public value, which will be delivered by Professor Meledina and our other colleagues following the next couple of days. So before we conclude, I'd just like to share the poll. Okay, so in the meantime, while the poll is loading, so within my role at the Mohammed bin Rashid, I'm also the program coordinator for the Masters of Public Policy. Now, the Masters of Public Policy in itself, the Masters of the Public Policy in itself really allows for prospective students the unique opportunity in order to develop and demonstrate those advanced intellectual practical skills when it comes to public policy development, administration, as well as evaluation. Now, in the meantime, Hamid, if you can help me with the poll, um, it's if you can just click on the, if you can help me out with the polling while I move forward. Now, the Masters of Public Policies program in itself has 6 main programs. This is also done in, a lot of our resources come from the Federal Competitiveness Statistics Authority here in the UAE, as well as it's aligned with the National Committee for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Now, within the Masters of Public Policy, we have social policy, we have education, we have science and technology, health, as well as sustainable development. Now, within our program, we have 4 main modules followed by the 2 specialisms. So it's 6 main modules that you would need to complete, followed by a dissertation. Now, the 4 core modules, the first being our governance and our policy process. So this information session that I've given you, this is where we cover this 12 weeks module is covered here. Then the evidence base in terms of how we gather that evidence, how we go about in gathering that evidence, our research methods, this is covered here. And then doing your cost benefit analysis and so on is covered in our public policy, economics and finance, as well as the microeconomics of competitive modules. Now, once you have completed these 4 main modules, you then go into your specialism that you would have chosen, whether it's in social policy, education, and so on. So within social policy, it looks at the social elements that are required to dealing in the field of social policy. So this goes from our well-being, from happiness, quality of life, and so on. Another core module within this socialism specialism, we also have our global governance, where this allows for students to go abroad to Geneva, for instance, where we take the students to the United Nations, and we have just over 12 visits over a week span, where the students get that opportunity to meet with UN entities, as well as specialized agencies such as the WHO, the International Labour Organization, the World Trade Center, and many others as well. So this really allows for the students to get that feel. Now, even though our global governance module falls within the public policy, we also open this, we also give students from other specialisms to also to participate in the global governance module, so to speak. We also have our education. So those critical core issues that are surrounding in education policy, there are 2 main modules, one looking at education policy and the development of education policy, and then doing that comparison with the higher education sector. Our third main specialization looks at health. Now, health policy, in the first module, we look at health policy, law, ethics, management, and the second module really focuses on The second module really focuses on public health leadership and systems thinking. Now, this is quite an apt specialization that has been that we run given the current situations we have. And our fourth main specialism focuses on sustainable development. Now, we are in the era of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs 2030, as we would know it. This is one of those critical 17 goals that we are working towards, countries across the world working towards attaining these 17 goals over a 15-year period. So we also have this specialized sustainable development concentration or specialism, so to speak. This within this module, we also have field trips to Germany as one of us as one of the countries. However, now the field trips, just a disclaimer, we haven't run any field trip within the last year because of the lockdowns and the COVID pandemic and so on. We are hoping to kickstart these field trips in the next semester. This semester, we still will not be running any of these field trips, but hopefully, inshallah, in the next semester, in September onwards, we will be hoping to resume our international field trips. And Professor Meladina will also speak to you about her innovation field trips that she and other colleagues do within the Masters of Innovation program. Then the fifth concentration we have is science and technology. Now, in science and technology, this will focus on the science policy and the technology aspect. And then the second aspect will look at the innovations of the science and technology track when it comes to markets, firms, as well as the policies. And once you have completed these four core modules, as well as your specialism, you then go into your dissertation phase. Once you've completed all of these, you graduate with your Masters of Public Policy with your specific specialism. Now, if you are a student that say, look, I don't want any of these specialism, I just want a general degree, this is all well and good as well. You will be required to do 4 of these core modules, and any of the first module of each of the specialism you can do. So any 2 of the first of these specialisms. So if you're a general student and you are interested in you are interested to do a general degree and you want to do global sustainable development challenge and social policy, this will be within your public policy general degree, and so on. So these are our main modules when we talk about the main components of it. Now, I'm seeing a couple of questions in terms of the delivery. Now, yes, you have 2 options, whether it's full-time, which can take anywhere from 12 teaching and studying months to 36 months. So between 12 to 36 teaching months, so to speak. This can be one of those options, or part-time, which can take anywhere from 18 months to 60 months in itself over the whole course of study. Within the public policy degree, as I mentioned earlier, it is directly aligned with the SDGs goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, and we take both approaches at the moment. We take live approaches, as well as students have the opportunity to go back online to get the lectures and engage in discussions that may occur on Blackboard. Now, I'm seeing some questions with regards to see if the public policy classes are completely virtual or if it's on site. So this semester, there is mixed, we will be doing a mixed approach where some of the classes would be online and some will be the classes will be at the, okay, just so that we don't have a mix up. The classes, regardless of the class being physically at the campus, we also will be running simultaneously the classes online within the Masters of Public Policy in itself. So for instance, for any reason you cannot attend the class physically at the campus, you can log in at the same time to get the live lecture as well. So, so this, I hope I've answered that question. Um, it is heavily supported by the e-learning resources. So you may say, look, I can't come to campus, but we have the textbooks electronically, which are in which Hamid, our library manager, who manages to ensure that we have our textbooks electronically. Another aspect that's really helpful to our students is having those opportunities for non-credit workshops, where we see the importance of, outside of these 6 modules here, we see the importance of having those opportunities to further develop the students, so to speak, and providing academic writing workshops, skills writing when it comes to research methods and so on. I know many of us may not have that research methods background, but we do offer those complementary of the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government. And from time to time, there are those non-credit workshops which are provided to our students. Students also have the opportunity to attend seminars as well as guest lectures, in addition to looking at local case studies from the School of Government that has been published. And most of our assessments within the Masters of Public Policy, I'm just trying to within the Masters of Public Policy, there are no exams. That most of the assessments are project-based. Where public policy, we've seen this as being is problem solving the real life scenarios in itself, in order to do your public policy analysis through critical thinking and so on, working with the practical and the real case scenarios, so as to allow the students to work on real life problems and to problem solve them as well. And students also have the opportunity to publish their work. So the publishing may take place through school publications, whether it's policy reports, research reports, policy briefs, or externally, where the students have opportunities to present at conferences, international conferences, local and international, publishing books, as well as journal papers and so on. So these are some of those key main areas where, the students get that opportunity. Now, some of the key dates that we want to remind students, prospective students, if you would like to apply for the Masters of the Public Policy degree, don't wait. You can apply now. Our first day of classes will occur on the 28th of February, later this month, within just 2 weeks from now. We will have, remember that non-credit workshops I mentioned, we will have that returning to learning session, as we call it, a 3-day sessions, which we give to the students so that prepare them before they start the classes in itself. Now, as mentioned, our field trips, we hope it's been postponed, hopefully till the end of the year. The end of the classes for this semester will be on the 2nd of June. The assessment, the end of assessment period would be by the 13th of June. Usually our grades will be declared by the 24th of June, and the next semester we'll start. The exact date to be confirmed, but we are hoping to start sometime in September 2021. Now, I still haven't been able to get the poll question up. For some reason, I'm not sure as to why, but we can open up
Yes,
questions and answers in the meantime. Go ahead, Hamid.
yes, Dr. Immanuel. Yes, the poll was launched and people responded to that, and it was closed also.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so do anyone have any questions with regards to the today's discussion on crisis management and public policy? Noted. So do anyone have any questions regarding the Masters of Public Policy or on the topic of crisis management and public policy? We just have a few minutes, in 2 or 3 minutes. I'll just briefly look at to see if we have any questions here. Um, in the absence of the public polling and limited civil society engagements, how do you set priorities that best serve citizens? This is a very good question, Fatima. Now, this in itself is, to briefly put it, your priority setting, setting those priorities comes from your government, from the government agendas, the strategic goals from the federal level and the emirate level. So this would be a good start to look at from that point of view in terms of seeing what types of priorities. Now, in terms of to best serve the citizens, you know, from my understanding, there are those opportunities of the public census that goes around. I received them from for instance, from the Dubai Statistics Center, from Abu Dhabi Statistics Center as well. We receive these, and within the Federal Competitiveness Statistics Authority, there is also that opportunity for you to have access to the data that's there, or reports under the open data law that has been given. So do we have any questions anyone would like to ask regarding the program? So remember, tomorrow, same time, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m., we have our innovation, Masters of Innovation talk, then followed by our Masters of Public Policy, and then our Executive Masters of Public Administration, which will be done every day of this week. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to thank each and every one of you, the 220 plus person that has tuned in today. Really appreciate your time. And should you like to enroll in our Masters of Public Policy degree, feel free. This is my direct email should you have any questions, or you can connect via LinkedIn or Twitter. Should you have any questions, don't hesitate to get in touch. Nawal has also put a couple of links in the chat box as well. And so should you have any questions or concerns, please do not hesitate to get in touch with us. So at this time, we can leave the session open. However, we can stop the recording, but we'd like to thank everyone for attending today's session.